Today, I want to take you with me to 3 very haunted castles. I'm going to tell you about the royal ghosts that still haunt the halls of Windsor Castle, a castle in Austria with a haunted torture chamber that you can still visit, and I also want to tell you about the haunting of a Japanese castle that inspired a very famous horror movie, and see if you can guess which one. Welcome back to Heart Starts Pounding, our final episode of 2025. I'm Kaelyn Moore, and I'm here with our friendly ghost Jinx, who is very excited for this episode. I wanted to do something both cozy and ghosty for the end of the year, so let's all sit by the fire and take this journey together. Now, we're going to be off next week because I'm going to have a baby. We'll see if he actually gets here on time. If he's anything like his mother, he's going to be late. But we do have some really great Patreon content to catch up on if you're looking for more. Last month, we covered the mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke. How did 118 colonists vanish from the face of the earth 400 years ago? Over on Patreon, we're also going to be doing our Wrapped episode where me, producer Matt, and producer Juno are going to talk about our favorite episodes from the year, and I can tell you about the episodes that performed best. And of course, there's a free trial on Patreon and on Apple Podcasts if you want to do that. But for now, sit back, relax, curl up by the fire. If you're in Australia or South America, maybe crank up your AC and just pretend that it's winter, and you can join me as we visit some ghosts. It's when your heart starts pounding. Windsor Castle sits on a chalk cliff above the River Thames just west of London, and it's been watching over England for nearly 1,000 years. William the Conqueror built it in 1070 as a fortress, but over the centuries it's become something more: a royal palace, a home, a prison, and according to many who have lived there, the most haunted royal residence in all of Britain. The castle is basically laid out in 3 sections, all arranged around a massive round tower that dominates the skyline. Now, if you're standing at the main entrance looking up at the castle, you've got the lower ward on your left, the middle ward where that iconic round tower sits, and then the upper ward on your right where the state apartments and the royal family's private quarters are located. The whole complex covers around 13 acres, and it includes everything from medieval defense walls to Victorian Gothic revival architecture. There's a long walk, which is this insanely long-lined avenue that stretches nearly 3 miles through Windsor Great Park. There's guard towers, gates, courtyards, endless corridors. It's massive, it's maze-like, and it's absolutely gorgeous. But for our Heart Starts Pounding tour of this castle, we're gonna head to the creepiest part, straight to the lower ward to St. George's Chapel, the final resting place for British royalty. St. George's Chapel sits at the western end of the lower ward, and when you first see it, it takes your breath away. It's this massive Gothic masterpiece built in the 1400s with huge stained glass windows that flood the interior with beautiful colored light. The ceiling is this intricate fan vaulting that looks almost too delicate to support its own weight. And as you're walking through it, gazing up at the ceiling, you might not notice that dozens of bodies are resting below your feet underneath the floor. 11 monarchs and many of their family members are buried here beneath this floor, including Queen Elizabeth II, who was buried here in 2022. That's a lot of history compressed into one building, and apparently, some of it hasn't left. In 1813, a prince regent came to this chapel and demanded that a vault beneath the choir floor be opened. It was the tomb of Charles I, the king who was beheaded on February 7th, 1649. He was just 48 years old and the first and only English monarch to be legally executed by his own government. Charles believed that he ruled by divine right, that he answered to God alone, not Parliament, and that belief eventually sparked the English Civil War in 1642. After years of fighting and betrayal, he was brought right here to Windsor Castle as a prisoner, where just before Christmas in 1648, he was tried for treason and ultimately beheaded. And as this Prince Regent started opening Charles's tomb, he thought about all of the supernatural occurrences surrounding Charles's death. For one, as King Charles I's body was being moved to St. George's, a sudden and violent snowstorm swept across the castle grounds. Thick, heavy flakes of snow nearly blinded the few mourners that were there, and when it finally slowed down, they saw that the black velvet pall covering his coffin had been magically transformed to snow white. The mourners all saw this transformation as a sign, as divine proof that their king was not really a traitor. That marked the first supernatural occurrence around King Charles, but it definitely wasn't the last. There have been multiple sightings of the king that have occurred after his death. There's whispers around the castle of King Charles's specter being seen in the cannon's house and walking through the cannon's cloister. The castle staff would call out to the king when they saw him, but he would just keep walking towards some unknown destination, his eyes open and unemotional, his head fully attached to his neck. And that was in part why the Prince Regent was there trying to open his tomb. He wanted to see for himself. Was the king's head reattached to his body in death after he had been beheaded? Slowly, the tomb was opened in the dead of night, and the cloth that Charles was buried in was peeled away. A horrid stench filled the air. And there, even after over 150 years, it was obvious that King Charles I's head was still attached to his body, and you could even see marks on his neck that showed someone had stitched it back on after his death. And you could even see the outline of where the blade made a clean cut all the way through his vertebrae. Now, King Charles I is the only royal who's been executed by his own government beneath the chapel floors, but he's not the only royal who is still haunting the grounds that is buried beneath the chapel floors. In fact, he's actually buried right next to King Henry VIII. And King Henry VIII is one of the most active ghosts in the entire castle. Staff at Windsor Castle say that you tend to hear Henry before you see him. First, it's heavy footsteps that echo throughout the Dean's Cloister, and then there's a dragging sound said to be from his ulcerated leg. This is usually accompanied by sounds of him moaning in agony. The staff don't really seem that worried, though, that Henry VIII stalks the grounds in perpetual pain. The guy was a total nightmare while he was alive. He went through 6 wives, divorced 2, beheaded 2, 1 died during childbirth, and 1 outlived him. He broke England away from the Catholic Church because the Pope wouldn't give him a divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. He basically created the Church of England just so he could marry Anne Boleyn, who he had been obsessed with for years. And then, 3 years later, he had her beheaded on charges of adultery and treason that were almost certainly fabricated. But still, if you're walking the castle at night and you start to hear that moan and hear the sound of a leg being dragged behind a man, you may want to run. But you need to be careful because Henry isn't the only vengeful and unstable king that haunts the grounds. In fact, not far from where Henry is typically seen, the ghost of the Mad King himself can be found. Now, King George III is sometimes called the king who lost America, but he's more often called Mad King George. For the first 50 years of his life, though, this Mad King wasn't so mad after all. He was known as being a devoted husband, a loving father to 15 children, and a genuinely good king who cared about his people. He was scholarly, he was interested in science and agriculture. They called him Farmer George because he actually enjoyed talking to common people about crops and livestock. He was very relatable in that way. But something changed in him in 1788, around the time he was 50 years old. He started having these episodes, violent outbursts, racing thoughts, talking for hours without stopping. His urine turned blue, and he'd have these attacks of very severe abdominal pain. His skin would become sensitive to light, and during his worst episodes, he couldn't even recognize his own wife and children. For over 200 years, doctors believed that George III had what's known as porphyria, a rare genetic disorder that affects the nervous system and can cause psychological symptoms along with physical ones. The blue urine, the abdominal pain, the mental disturbances, they all fit the symptom list. But I will add that more recent researchers have questioned this diagnosis, and they've suggested that he may have had bipolar disorder or some other psychiatric condition, and the blue urine was part of something else that was happening, like a UTI. We'll probably never know for sure, but what we do know is that in 1810, George III was completely incapacitated by this illness. He was blind, he was deaf, and he spent his final years, which was almost a decade, confined to a room in Windsor Castle, often restrained in a straitjacket, and sometimes not even recognizing where he was. His son ruled while George III lived out his last years in darkness and confusion. But it was said that he would have these lucid periods about once a day, where he would stand at his window and watch the guards parade past. He may not have known where he was, or even who his own children were, but when he heard the guards march past his window every afternoon, he knew deep down that once he had been king. Every day he would stand in that window and he would return their salute to them. After George III died in January of 1820, while his body still lay in state, the guards were marching past his window when the commanding officer saw the unmistakable figure of the king standing in his customary place. Instinctively, he ordered his soldiers to face the king, and as they turned, every single one of them saw the king standing there, and they watched as he returned their salute one final time. Multiple witnesses, the entire guard unit, all seeing the same thing. A king who loved his troops so much that not even death could keep him from honoring them one last time. People still to this day will see him standing at that window, looking longingly out, maintaining his post. And honestly, after everything he went through, after all of those years of confusion and darkness, maybe it is kind of a comfort that his ghost appears lucid, dignified, and doing the thing that gave him purpose. Now, all the ghosts that we've talked about so far have been real royalty that have lived in the castle. But according to some legends, not everything that haunts the grounds is human. For our final stop, we need to leave the castle itself and venture into Windsor Great Park, because this is where something dark stalks the woods. Something unexplainable. The legend goes back to the reign of Richard II in the late 1300s. Herne was a royal huntsman, one of the best, and a favorite of the king. One day, during a hunt, Richard II and Herne cornered a white stag who attacked the two. Herne ended up throwing himself between the stag and the king, and that caused him to be attacked to the brink of death. But ultimately, he saved Richard's life. And as Herne lay on the ground, coming in and out of consciousness, this mysterious dark figure from the woods appeared. Some say it was a wizard, others say it was the devil himself. But this figure offered to save Herne's life. He cut off the stag's antlers and he tied them to Herne's head. Herne ended up surviving and the figure disappeared back into that forest. But after this supernatural encounter, a couple of weird things happened. First and foremost, Herne lost his ability to hunt entirely. Now, when other huntsmen witnessed Herne coming back to the castle with these bloody stag horns tied to his head, they accused him of poaching. Herne tried to explain to them what happened about the strange shadowy figure that approached him and saved his life, but no one really believed this story. Eventually, the other huntsmen were even able to convince Richard II of this poaching scandal. They knew that Herne was Richard's favorite and they wanted him to fall out of favor. And because of this, Herne was dismissed from his duties. Now, this caused him to spiral, and he ended up going into Windsor Forest and hanged himself from a great oak tree. But that's not the end of this story. After his death, the huntsmen who framed him also lost their abilities to hunt entirely. Every trap they set, every arrow they shot, all missed. Not knowing what else to do, they all ventured into the woods and tried to conjure this mysterious figure that Herne had told them about. They wanted to see if it could help them. Now, he did appear to them, and he told them to meet at an oak tree at midnight, the very same oak tree where Herne died. That night, Herne's ghost appeared to them, and he was wearing the bloody stag's antlers. The next morning, those huntsmen were all found hanged from the same tree, their faces frozen in terror. Ever since then, people have said they've seen Herne in Windsor Great Park, a figure with massive antlers riding this phantom black horse, accompanied by spectral hounds and rattling chains. He tends to appear during winter storms, usually at midnight, and the legend says that his appearance signals national disasters and warns that a monarch is near death. The legend has actually spread so far that Shakespeare even wrote about Herne in The Merry Wives of Windsor in 1597, describing how he, quote, doth all the winter time at still midnight walk round about an oak. And sightings of Hearn have continued closer to the present day. In 1962, some schoolboys found an old hunting horn in Windsor Great Park, and they decided to blow it. According to them, Hearn and his spectral huntsman all appeared, riding through the trees towards them. The boys all fled in terror. And in 1976, a guardsman reported seeing a statue in the Italian garden come to life and start growing antlers just like Hearn. The original Hearn's oak, which was over 600 years old at the time, fell in 1836. Those logs were burned in the castle fireplace, but it didn't do anything to stop Hearn's ghost from appearing. Now there's a replacement tree that stands on the spot, and people still hear hunting horns in the dead of night, and every now and then they'll still see a shadowy, antlered figure through the mist. Windsor Castle is still very much a working royal residence. The royal family knows about the ghosts, supposedly. A lot of them have said that they've seen them. Prince William reportedly said when he was warned about the ghosts before moving in, quote, "No old hall would be complete without ghosts, would it?" And maybe that's the thing about Windsor Castle. It's not just haunted by the past, it's still very much living with it. 1,000 years of history doesn't just fade away. Sometimes it rides through the park still on winter nights. Sometimes it returns a salute one final time, or checks on old library books, or argues with a long-dead spouse or two whose deaths it engineered. Or, in the case of our next castle, sometimes the past hangs around and has more sinister intentions. The next castle that I want to tell you about sits perched at over 3,500 feet in a remote region just south of Salzburg. And if you were to tour the grounds, you would find a pretty unusual and morbid feature of this castle. Now, in the courtyard between two of the castle sections sits a 50-meter deep well, and that is an entry point into the deep belly of the castle that sits below ground, the dungeons. These dungeons have no windows, there's no natural light that comes through. The torture chamber down there, which is still visible to visitors today, contains some of the original instruments from the 17th century. And if you take the narrow stone staircase down to the cells where prisoners waited, the acoustics create something unnatural. Footsteps start echoing, voices carry around corners. Even your breath seems totally amplified. And according to many tourists, you may even hear the sounds of something otherworldly, like echoey screams coming from down a long stone hallway. The castle remembers the events that took place in these torture chambers, and what happened there between 1675 and 1690 was one of the most unusual and horrific witch hunts in European history. This is Musum Castle, and it's what's called a spur castle, built on a narrow ridge of rock that juts out from the mountains. It's surrounded by these thick alpine forests. It was first documented in 1191 when it belonged to the noble Musum family, and some believe that it sits on the foundation of a Roman fortress. In 1285, the Prince Archbishops of Salzburg seized the castle after accusing the Musums of disloyalty, and it remained under control of the church for the next 5 centuries. And starting in 1520, Musum became the judicial center for parts of Austria, which meant that every aspect of the justice system happened here. Trials, imprisonment, torture, and execution. And years after it opened, a mass hysteria would sweep through the countryside, landing thousands within these walls. Witch trials. These trials began with a single arrest in 1675. This woman named Barbara Kaelyn worked in the animal slaughter trade near Salzburg, a profession that definitely placed her firmly at the bottom of society's hierarchy. One day, when Barbara arrived at work, she saw the authorities were there waiting for her. She was told that an offertory box from a church in Goling had gone missing, and that she was the most likely suspect. Now, Barbara had no idea what these officers were talking about, but they still grabbed her by the wrists and dragged her down into the dungeons at Musum Castle. She was arrested on suspicion of theft, but also witchcraft. What happened next was horrifyingly routine for witch trials of that era. Barbara was tortured in the castle dungeons. Her hands were tied behind her back, and a rope was attached to her wrist and thrown over a pulley or a beam in the ceiling. From there, she was hoisted up into the air, suspended by her arms behind her. This was so her own body weight would dislocate her shoulders while they interrogated her. Her thumbs were then crushed by metal bars, burning irons were pushed into her skin, and eventually, Barbara just couldn't take it anymore. She begged for death, but the prison guards weren't so kind. And so, not knowing what else she could do, she confessed. She admitted that, yes, she was a witch. Just please stop the torture. But that wasn't enough for the interrogators. Tell us who helped you, they demanded, and they crushed her thumbs even harder until you could hear the bones breaking. And that's when Barbara said something that would eventually doom 139 people to death. She told them that her 20-year-old son, Paul Jacob Kohler, had made a pact with Satan himself. And then she was burned alive at the stake in August of 1675. Her son, Jacob, nicknamed Jackal or Wizard Jack, immediately became the most wanted man in all of Salzburg. Authorities issued a warrant for his arrest, continually increasing the reward for turning him in, but he was always able to avoid being captured somehow. So the authorities started arresting every homeless boy on the street to interrogate them. One of them must have seen Jacob out on the street, even though there were reports in 1677 that claimed he had died. But then this 12-year-old homeless boy named Feldner was arrested. And under the same torture that Barbara endured, he caved, and he claimed that he had seen Jackal just 3 weeks earlier. Doing what? The guard asked, pulling Feldner up by a rope until his shoulders dislocated from his sockets. The boy cried out in pain and confessed that Jackal was the leader of gangs of beggar children in the area, and he had seen him teaching these kids his black magic. That single confession triggered the 15-year reign of terror. Every single beggar child in Salzburg was pulled off of the street and dragged into the torture chambers at Musum. They were all accused of being taught the devil's magic from Jackal. And then they were tortured, their bones were crushed and dislocated until they named other children, and finally, they were executed. Now, in typical European witch hunts, about 75% of the victims were women. They were usually elderly, usually poor, operating outside of acceptable societal norms. But the Salzburg trials completely reversed those numbers. Of the 139 people executed at Musum Castle between 1675 and 1690, 81% of them were men and boys. And the age breakdown is even more disturbing. 39 victims were children between 10 and 14 years old, and another 53 were teenagers and young adults between 15 and 21. All but 2 of the 139 executed were homeless. And the saddest part is, that was completely by design. No wealthy aristocrats were accused of witchcraft, just the beggars that the government wanted off the street anyways. See, years earlier, the 30 Years' War had occurred. It was a war from 1618 to 1648 that combined religious warfare, dynastic struggles, and territorial ambitions, and it had killed somewhere between 5 and 8 million people across the Holy Roman Empire. Some regions lost 2/3 of their population, and the war created this unprecedented number of orphans. By the 1670s, groups of homeless teenagers were highly visible throughout all of Salzburg, and authorities felt like these boys were too aggressive in their begging, and that they represented proof that times were bad and leadership was failing. So the narrative that was built around Jackal and his black magic provided the perfect justification for eliminating this problem that they felt they had. As each new child was arrested and tortured, the mythology just grew. Under interrogation, the accused confessed that Jackal was influencing them. He could make himself invisible, they said. He could turn blocks of wood into mice. He could transform into a wolf or enchant rats to ruin harvests. And the transcripts of the Musum trials that are all preserved in the Salzburg archives showed that interrogators carefully guided these confessions, using children's imaginations to create an ever more fantastical legend of Jackal as this all-powerful sorcerer. For those who confessed or who were convicted, the executions were public spectacles. Children under 14 often had their hands cut off and were branded with burning irons, and then they were paraded through Salzburg streets as warnings before they were burned alive. Teenagers and adults were sometimes granted the, quote, mercy of being hanged or decapitated before their bodies were burned, But many, many victims, especially the youngest ones, were burned alive at the stake. The peak of the trials came in 1681 when 109 people were executed in a single year. Now, these trials eventually ended in 1690. By then, the hysteria had simply exhausted itself. Jackal was never found, and that gradually undermined the entire narrative. The circle of persecution had widened so far, children, teenagers, anyone poor or homeless, that it completely disrupted normal social functioning in the area. And in general, all across Europe, skepticism about witchcraft was growing. The Roman Inquisition had acknowledged as early as 1635 that it had, quote, found scarcely one trial conducted legally. And then, 100 years after the torture ended, in 1790, the castle fell in total decay. And that's when something else strange happened on the grounds. In the 1790s, deer and cattle started turning up dead on the castle grounds, torn apart viscerally by something. Locals immediately blamed the remaining castle residents and the horrors that had occurred on the grounds all those years ago. The devil must have not left, they said, and he was tainting all of those who remained. They ended up accusing the residents of being werewolves, and so a mob stormed the castle grounds and murdered everyone who was living there in the courtyard. And after that, the castle was abandoned until 1886. Today, Musum Castle is owned by the descendants of a count who purchased the ruins and restored them. You can tour the castle if you dare and see the replica torture chamber, stand in the dungeons where kids as young as 10 waited to be interrogated, and then you can walk through the courtrooms where their fates were decided. The executioner's sword is still on display, and so are some of the original torture devices. And if you believe some of the stories, those children victims never really left the area. Visitors report hearing footsteps echoing through empty hallways, only to turn around and see that no one's there behind them. There's also this near constant sound of chains dragging across cold stone floors and tons of cold spots. I kept reading about all the cold spots that everyone feels, even in the dead of summer. The torture chamber in particular is where most of this activity is. People say they often feel touched by unseen little hands or that they're watched by invisible eyes. The most common apparition, actually, that people report seeing is a young woman in white who wanders the corridors, moaning, disappearing when she's approached. This may very well be Barbara, cursed to wander the grounds for all of eternity for her part in starting the witch trials. On quiet nights, locals say that you can still hear screams echoing from the mountains where 139 people met horrific deaths for the crime of being young, poor, homeless, and in the wrong place at the wrong time. The phantom at the center of all of this, Jackal, has never been seen, and he was never caught. But his legacy, which is now a cautionary tale about how fear, prejudice, and crisis can combine into lethal persecution of the most vulnerable, still haunts the stone walls of Musum today. Now, let's move on to our final haunted castle, one that has also sparked many legends that continue to haunt not only the walls of the castle, but also haunt the nightmares of millions around the world, maybe even your own nightmares. Picture this. It's nightfall at Himeji Castle in feudal Japan. The last rays of sunlight disappear behind the castle's brilliant white walls, and darkness creeps all through the stone corridors. A young page named Morita Zusho stands at the base of the main keep, clutching a paper lantern in his trembling hand. His friends have dared him to prove whether the rumors are true, whether something supernatural really lives at the top of the castle tower. Zusho begins his ascent. The wooden stairs creak beneath his feet. His lantern casts dancing shadows on the walls as he climbs higher and higher past the first floor, the second floor, then the third. The castle seems to close in around him. His heart is pounding so loud he can hear it echoing in the empty chambers. Finally, he reaches the 6th floor, the very top, and that's when he sees it. A faint light emanating from a door in the attic. Someone or something is up there. Before he can turn back, a woman's voice cuts through the darkness. "Who's there?"
Who's there?
Zusho freezes. He hears the distinct rustle of silk, the whispers of fabric moving around. The door starts to slide open slowly, revealing not the ancient crone everyone whispered about, but an elegant woman in her 30s wearing an elaborate 12-layered ceremonial kimono that marks her as someone of extraordinary rank. This is Osakabe Hime, the Lady of the Walls. She's a powerful yokai who has haunted the uppermost floors of Himeji Castle for centuries. She despises humans, and she only emerges once a year to meet with the castle lord and foretell the castle's fate. Legend says that she can read your heart and manipulate you like a puppet, and anyone who sees her face dies instantly. But tonight, amused by Zusho's honesty and his bravery, she doesn't kill him. Instead, she hands him proof of their encounter, a piece of his own master's family armor, a Shikorobuki neck guard that should have been safely locked away elsewhere in the castle. "You'll need proof that you actually saw me," she says, her voice carrying centuries of knowledge and power. The next day, when Zusho presents the heirloom to his stunned master, everyone realizes the impossible has happened. He met the spirit at the top of the tower, and he lived to tell the tale. This is one of the most famous stories from one of Japan's most haunted castles, Himeji Castle, called White Heron Castle because its brilliant white walls make it look like a bird taking flight, sits about an hour west of Osaka. It was built between 1333 and 1609, and is widely considered the finest surviving example of Japanese castle architecture. UNESCO recognized it as a World Heritage Site in 1993, and that's for good reason. This place is massive. The complex contains 83 buildings, all connected by a maze of defense passages designed to confuse and slow attackers. The main keep rises 152 feet into the air, appearing to have 5 stories from the outside, but actually containing 6 floors plus the basement. It's a deceptive design that's meant to throw off enemies. The upper floors are really sparse. There's these narrow staircases that connect bare wooden rooms. The 6th floor, where Osakabe Hime dwells, contains only 115 square meters and a small shrine that was built specifically to appease her after a mysterious illness plagued the castle lords who displaced her mountain shrine during construction. The castle has survived almost 700 years of war, natural disasters, even World War II. During the bombing of Himeji in 1945, a firebomb landed directly on the top floor, but it failed to explode. The castle stood while the entire city around it burned. Some people say it's luck, but other people say that Osakabe Hime protects her domain no matter what. But the Lady of the Walls isn't the only ghost that's said to haunt Himeji Castle, and she's certainly not the most famous one, at least outside of Japan. There's another spirit here, one whose story is even more tragic. Okiku was a beautiful young servant who worked at Himeji Castle during Japan's feudal era, probably around the 1520s. Her job was to wash dishes and care for the household's most precious possessions, including a set of 10 valuable decorative plates, these heirlooms that had been passed down through generations. Over time, a samurai named Aoyama Tetsuzan became infatuated with Okiku, proposing again and again that she become his mistress. Each time, Okiku refused. She would not compromise her honor, no matter who asked. Aoyama's patience eventually ran out. If she wouldn't submit willingly, he was going to force her hand. So he devised a cruel plan. He secretly stole one of the 10 precious plates and he hid it away. The next day, he summoned Okiku and told her that one of her master's plates was missing. Okiku's blood ran cold. Losing a family heirloom was punishable by death. With trembling hands, she opened the box and began to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. She counted again and again and again, always getting to 9 plates, never 10. Tears were streaming down her face. Aoyama watched her panic, and then he leaned in close to her ear with his offer. "I could overlook this matter. I could tell the master it wasn't your fault, but only if you finally become my lover." Now, even facing execution, Okiku refused this proposal. She did not want anything to do with that man. So he took her punishment upon himself. He had her beaten with wooden swords and then bound with ropes and dragged to the deep castle well. There, they suspended her over the dark opening and began lowering her into the freezing water, plunging her deep into the castle well until her lungs burned and she started losing consciousness. And then they hauled her back up, and Aoyama himself beat her again with his wooden sword. And then it was this horrible pattern of bringing her down into the well and then up and then down and then up, each time demanding that she submit to him. And each time she squarely refused. Finally, in a rage, Aoyama released the ropes. Okiku's broken body plummeted into the depths of the well, and the water closed over her until she completely vanished. But her death was not the end of her story. Not long after this, strange things began happening at the castle. At night, when darkness fell, those near the well would hear a woman's voice echoing up from the depths, counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okiku's ghost had returned, and those who saw her said that she would rise up from the well, this pale, dripping figure in white with long black hair hanging in wet tangles over her face. And every night she would count. And when she reached 9, unable to find the 10th plate, she would let out a blood-curdling shriek that echoed throughout the entire castle before she would vanish back into the well. Anyone who heard even a part of Okiku's counting was cursed and would become severely ill. But those who heard her count all the way to 9 would die. Night after night, Okiku's ghost tormented Aoyama. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't escape that voice, counting over and over and over. And some versions of the story say that she eventually drove him to complete madness. Eventually, the castle lord summoned a Buddhist priest to deal with this haunting. The priest prepared himself with prayer and meditation, and then he positioned himself in the garden near the well as darkness fell. He began chanting sutras, and he waited. And then, at midnight, Okiku appeared. Her ghost rose from the well, and she began her eternal count. 1, 2, 3. But then, when Okiku reached 9 and opened her mouth to scream, the priest shouted at the top of his lungs, 10. Her ghost froze. The scream died on her lips. Relief washed over all of her spectral features as she realized someone must have finally found the 10th plate. She smiled, and then she faded away like a mist. From that night on, it's said that Okiku never haunted the castle again. Or did she? Some versions of this story insist that this exorcism didn't actually work, that Okiku still rises from the well every night when the castle closes, that she's still screaming, still searching for the justice that never came. The well exists to this very day. You can go visit it. Tourists will gather around the metal grating, peering down into the darkness, wondering if they might hear something from below. And locals will tell you that when the castle closes at night, you can still hear Okiku's voice echoing up from the depths. Now, if this story sounds familiar, a girl with long black hair who died in a well rising as a vengeful spirit in a white burial garment, that's because you've absolutely seen her before. Not in feudal Japan, but crawling out of a TV screen. Okiku's story was the direct inspiration for the 1998 Japanese film Ringu, known in English as The Ring, based on the 1991 novel. Sadako, or Samara in the American remake, is essentially Okiku transported into the modern age, her curse spreading not through the castle corridors, but through videotapes and television screens. Okiku's well still sits at Himeji Castle. It's covered in iron bars today, and this castle has survived everything: wars, earthquakes, firebombs, and it's said to be all because of the ghosts that still linger there to this day, protecting it eternally from these threats. It's an amazing place to go visit. Just pray that if you stand over Okiku's well, you don't ever hear her voice. And I will leave you with that. That's all I have for you this week. Actually, that's all I have for you this year. Do you guys have any more haunted places you want us to visit on this show? We have all of our programming next year to explore more haunted locations. So let me know in the comments or wherever you listen. And once again, you can catch up on all of the great monthly bonus episodes, archived episodes, and more, all for free with a trial, which is always nice around this time of year with Christmas shopping and holiday travel and all of that. Links are going to be in the description if you want to go listen to any of that stuff. I'm so excited for everything that next year has in store for us. 2025 was truly the best year of my life, and I cannot wait for 2026 with you guys. But until next year, stay curious. Ooh. Heart Starts Pounding is written and produced by me, Kaelyn Moore. Heart Starts Pounding is also produced by Matt Brown. Our associate producer is Juno Hobbs. Additional research and writing by Matt Brown. Sound design and mix by Peachtree Sound. Special thanks to Travis Dunlap, Grayson Jernigan, the team at WME, and Ben Chaffee. Have a heart-pounding story or a case request? Check out heartstartspounding.com.